The champagne bubbles caught the candlelight as Derek raised his glass across our anniversary dinner table, his smile stretching wide enough to show his perfect veneers. "To 5 wonderful years," he said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he used with clients at his law firm. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." But there was something else in his eyes tonight, something that made my stomach clench with a familiar dread. I lifted my own glass, the crystal trembling slightly in my fingers. Around us, the rooftop restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of other couples, the Austin skyline twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. This place had cost him a fortune to book, the kind of exclusive venue that required connections and months of advanced planning. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could have bought the entire restaurant with what my company had earned in the past quarter alone. "Maya," Derek continued, setting down his glass with deliberate precision, "we need to talk about our future." The words hung between us like a guillotine blade. 5 years of marriage had taught me to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his jaw tightened when he was about to deliver news he knew would hurt. Tonight felt different, though, charged with an electricity that made my skin prickle with warning. "What about our future?" I asked quietly, though part of me already knew. The late nights he'd been working, the hushed phone calls, the way he'd grown distant over the past few months, all of it suddenly crystallized into a picture I didn't want to see. Derek straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken from his days as a junior associate. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore. We've grown apart, become different people. I've been thinking that maybe it's time we consider a separation." The word hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of hiding my true success, of pretending to be the struggling freelance consultant he thought he'd married, had given me practice at masking my emotions. What he didn't know was that while he'd been planning this conversation, I'd been building something extraordinary in the shadows of our marriage. "A separation," I repeated, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "On our anniversary." He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I know the timing isn't ideal, but I didn't want to keep pretending. We both deserve honesty." Honesty. The word almost made me laugh. If Derek wanted honesty, I could give him more than he'd bargained for. I could tell him about Velocity Sync, the AI-powered logistics company I'd been secretly building for the past 3 years. I could explain how my freelance consulting work had actually been the cover story for building something that was now valued at $15 million. I could show him the contracts with Fortune 500 companies, the patents pending in my name, the acquisition offers I'd been fielding from tech giants. Instead, I took a sip of champagne and asked, "Is there someone else?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. His hand moved instinctively to his phone, lying face down beside his plate, and I caught the telltale flush that crept up his neck when he was caught in a lie. "This isn't about anyone else," he said, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "This is about us, about what's best for both of us." I nodded slowly, studying his face in the candlelight. Derek had always been handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way that his mother Patricia had found so suitable. When we'd met at the University of Texas 7 years ago, I'd been the scholarship kid from a small New Mexico town, working 3 jobs to pay for my computer science degree. Derek had been the golden boy, son of a prominent Austin attorney, destined for success in the family practice. "What's best for both of us?" I echoed. "I see. Maya, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We can work out the details civilly. I've already spoken to a lawyer about how to divide our assets fairly." Of course he had. Derek Thompson never did anything without a plan, without consulting his network of connections and calculating every angle. What he hadn't calculated was that the quiet, supportive wife he thought he knew had been building her own empire while he slept. "Which lawyer?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Harrison Mills. He's handled several divorces for partners at the firm. He says, since we don't have significant assets and you don't have a regular income stream, it should be straightforward." There it was, the casual dismissal that had defined our entire marriage. Derek had never truly seen me as an equal partner, despite my MBA, despite my technical expertise, despite the fact that I'd been quietly supporting our lifestyle with money he assumed came from my parents or lucky consulting gigs. To him, I was still the grateful scholarship student who'd been lucky enough to marry up. "Straightforward," I murmured, reaching for my purse. "That's one way to put it." Derek mistook my movement for distress. His expression softened slightly, and he reached across the table to touch my hand. "Maya, I know this is a shock, but we're both still young. We can both find happiness elsewhere. I'll make sure you're taken care of in the settlement." Taken care of. As if I were a dependent child rather than a woman who'd been secretly out-earning him by a factor of 10. I looked down at his hand covering mine, remembering when that touch had made me feel safe and loved. Now it felt like a cage I was finally ready to break free from. "Actually, Derek," I said, gently pulling my hand away, "I think there are a few things we need to discuss before any lawyers get involved." Something in my tone must have registered because his confident smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the secure app that connected me to Velocity Sync's financial dashboard. The numbers glowed on the screen, testament to 3 years of 18-hour days, brilliant coding, and strategic partnerships that Derek knew nothing about. "I mean that your lawyer might want to reassess what constitutes our significant assets," I said, turning the phone so he could see the screen. Derek's eyes widened as he took in the figures. Revenue projections, cash flow statements, valuation, reports. His face went through a series of expressions, from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. "What is this?" he whispered. "This is Velocity Sync," I said calmly. "My company, the one I've been building while you thought I was struggling to find consulting clients. The one that's currently valued at $15 million and growing." The color drained from his face. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance of service and conversation, but our table had become an island of stunned silence. "That's impossible," he said finally. "You would have told me. We're married. You can't just hide something like this." "Can't I?" I asked, taking another sip of champagne. "You seem to have hidden quite a bit yourself, like Chloe Brennan from your office. The one whose calls you've been taking in the garage for the past 3 months. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I'd known about Chloe almost from the beginning. When you spend your days analyzing data patterns and tracking digital footprints for a living, spotting the signs of an affair becomes almost trivial. Changed passwords, deleted texts, mysterious meetings that didn't appear on his shared calendar. I could have confronted him months ago, but I'd been too busy building my escape plan. "Maya, I can explain about Chloe." "No need," I interrupted. "I think we've both explained enough for one evening." I stood up, smoothing down my black dress. It was a simple designer piece that Derek had complimented earlier, not knowing that I'd bought it with profits from a single day's revenue. Everything about our life together had been built on these small deceptions, these careful omissions. But tonight, the truth was finally out. "Where are you going?" Derek asked, his voice tight with panic. "Home," I said. "To pack some things. I think a separation is exactly what we both need." "Wait," he called after me, but I was already walking away. As I passed other diners, I caught fragments of their conversations about business deals and romantic getaways, the casual chatter, Of people whose lives hadn't just imploded over anniversary champagne. The elevator ride down from the restaurant felt like descending through layers of my old life. By the time I reached the parking garage, I could feel my phone buzzing with calls from Derek, but I ignored them. There would be time for conversations. Later, after I'd had a chance to process what had just happened and plan my next moves. Driving through the Austin streets toward our house in Westlake Hills, I thought about how I'd ended up here. The girl from small-town New Mexico who'd worked her way through college, who'd met and fallen in love with a charming law student, who'd believed that marriage meant partnership and mutual support. That girl had been naive in ways I could barely remember now. The transformation had been gradual. After graduation, while Derek stepped seamlessly into his father's firm, I'd struggled to find my footing in Austin's tech scene. My computer science degree was solid, but I lacked the connections and pedigree that seemed to matter in the city's established circles. The consulting work I'd initially taken on had been genuine, small projects for local businesses that barely paid enough to cover my student loans. But then I'd noticed something. The logistics companies I was helping with their digital transformations all had the same problem. Their systems were outdated, inefficient, unable to handle the complexity of modern supply chains. There was a gap in the market, a need for intelligent software that could adapt and optimize in real time. Late at night, while Derek worked on briefs and billable hours, I'd started coding. What began as a side project to improve my own client's systems gradually evolved into something much bigger. Velocity Sync wasn't just another piece of logistics software. It was an AI-powered platform that could predict supply chain disruptions, optimize routing in real time, and adapt to changing conditions with minimal human intervention. The first client had been a mid-sized manufacturing company whose owner I'd met at a tech meetup. He'd been desperate, facing penalties for late deliveries and struggling with an antiquated tracking system. I'd offered to build him something custom, and within 6 months, his on-time delivery rate had improved by 30%, while his logistics costs dropped by 20%. Word spread quietly through Austin's business community. Not the flashy startup, world of apps and social media, but the unsexy realm of warehouses and shipping containers where real money was made and lost. Companies that had been struggling with supply chain chaos suddenly found themselves operating with precision they'd never imagined possible. I'd been careful to keep Velocity Sync separate from my married life. The company was incorporated under my maiden name, Rodriguez, with a registered address at a co-working space in East Austin. My business partner and CTO, Jordan Kim, handled most of the client-facing work while I focused on development and strategy. To anyone who asked, including Derek, I was still just doing small consulting projects for local businesses. The deception had become easier over time, especially as Derek grew more absorbed in his own career. Partnership track at Thompson & Associates required long hours and constant networking. He'd travel to conferences, work weekends, and arrive home exhausted from playing the political games that law firm advancement required. He'd never been particularly interested in the technical details of my work anyway, content to assume that my contributions to our household expenses came from the modest retainer clients he occasionally heard me mention. Meanwhile, Velocity Sync had quietly grown into something extraordinary. We now served clients across 3 states, with annual revenue approaching 8 figures. The AI algorithms I'd developed were genuinely revolutionary, capable of predicting and preventing supply chain disruptions with unprecedented accuracy. Major corporations had started taking notice, and in the past 6 months, I'd fielded acquisition offers that would have made Derek's legal salary look like pocket change. But I'd kept it all hidden, partly out of habit and partly out of a growing realization that my marriage was built on a foundation that couldn't support the weight of truth. Derek loved the idea of the wife he'd married, the grateful scholarship, student who'd been lifted up by his family's connections and status. He'd never quite figured out what to do with a woman who might be his equal, let alone his superior in ambition and achievement. Pulling into our driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house we'd bought together 3 years ago. It was a beautiful place, All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of modern architecture that photographed well for Derek's social media posts. We'd stretched our budget to afford it, or at least Derek had stretched his. My contribution had been carefully calculated to appear proportional to what a struggling consultant might manage, while the real money I was earning went into business. Investments and personal accounts Derek knew nothing about. Inside, the house felt different somehow, as if the conversation at dinner had changed the molecular structure of the space. I walked through rooms that had been our shared life, noting the small compromises and accommodations that had shaped our domestic landscape. Derek's law books dominated the study, while my computer setup occupied a corner of the guest bedroom. His golf trophies filled the living room mantelpiece, while my few personal mementos were relegated to the bedroom dresser. I'd been living as a guest in my own life, I realized, making myself smaller to fit into the space Derek's vision of our marriage allowed. Even our social circle was entirely his, drawn from the law firm and his family's country club connections. I'd attended countless dinners and cocktail parties where I was introduced as Derek's wife who does something with computers, smiling politely while conversations flowed around subjects I wasn't expected to understand or contribute to meaningfully. My phone buzzed again. Derek, probably still at the restaurant trying to process what I'd revealed. There would be more calls tonight and tomorrow and in the days to come. He would want explanations, justifications, details about how I'd managed to build something significant without his knowledge or participation. He might be angry, confused, possibly even impressed despite himself. But first, I needed to make some calls of my own. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and opened the walk-in closet, pulling out a suitcase I'd purchased months ago when I'd first begun to suspect that this day might come. As I packed clothes and personal items, I speed-dialed Jordan Kim. "Maya?" Jordan's voice carried surprise. It was nearly midnight, well past our usual business hours. "Is everything okay?" "Derek and I are separating," I said without preamble. "He asked for a divorce tonight and I told him about Velocity Sync." A long pause. Jordan had been the only person who knew the full extent of my deception, the only one who understood why I'd felt the need to keep my success secret. As my business partner and closest confidant over the past 3 years, Jordan had watched me navigate the increasingly complex emotional landscape of hiding my true life from my husband. "How did he take it?" Jordan asked finally. "About as well as you'd expect. Shock, disbelief, probably calculating how much money he thinks he's entitled to in a settlement. Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. In the 3 hours since Derek had asked for a divorce, I'd been operating on adrenaline and strategic thinking. I hadn't really stopped to consider how I felt about the end of my marriage. "I think I'm relieved," I said, surprised by the honesty of the admission. I've been living a double life for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be completely myself. "What do you need from me?" This was why I'd partnered with Jordan. Direct, practical, focused on solutions rather than drama. In the cutthroat world of Austin tech, that kind of reliability was worth more than gold. "Legal protection for the company," I said. "Derek's going to lawyer up, and he'll try to claim community property rights to Velocity Sync. I need to make sure our intellectual property, client relationships, and financial assets are bulletproof. I'll call our attorney first thing in the morning. What about the acquisition talks with Dataflow Industries?" I paused, considering. The offer from Dataflow had been on the table for 2 months, a potential exit strategy that would net us both enough money to never work again if we chose. I'd been hesitant to move forward, partly because of the disruption it would cause to my carefully constructed double life, and partly because I wasn't ready to let go of the company I'd built. From nothing. Put them on hold for now, I decided. I want to see how the divorce plays out before making any major decisions about the company's future. Understood. Maya? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. You deserve to be with someone who knows who you really are and loves you for it. After hanging up, I continued packing, my movements automatic while my mind raced through the implications of the evening's revelations. Derek would hire an aggressive divorce attorney, probably someone from his network who specialized in high-asset cases. They would scrutinize every aspect of Velocity Sync, looking for ways to establish his claim to half of everything I'd built. But I'd been preparing for this possibility for months. The company's structure was carefully designed to protect my interests, with key intellectual property assigned to entities Derek had no connection to. More importantly, I had documentation proving that Velocity Sync had been built entirely with my own labor and resources, without any contribution from marital assets or Derek's support. The irony was that Derek's own behavior had made my legal position stronger. His dismissive attitude toward my work, his assumption that my financial contributions to our marriage were negligible, his complete lack of interest in or support for my professional development, all of it created a paper trail that would be difficult for him to overcome in court. As I zipped up the suitcase, I caught sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Not the struggling consultant Derek thought he'd married, not the grateful scholarship student his family had grudgingly accepted, but someone entirely new. Someone who'd built a multi-million-dollar company in secret, who'd outmaneuvered her husband's deception with patient strategy, who was finally ready to stop hiding her light under the bushel of other people's expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Please come back. We need to talk about this properly. I was wrong to blindside you like that." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. There would be time for talking later, through lawyers and mediators and the formal machinery of divorce. Tonight, I was finally free to be myself, completely and without apology. I carried my suitcase downstairs and loaded it into my car. As I drove away from the house in Westlake Hills, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future. Not a future defined by Derek's ambitions or his family's expectations, but one limited only by my own vision and determination. The city lights of Austin spread out before me as I headed toward the downtown hotel where I'd booked a suite for the coming weeks. Somewhere behind me, Derek was probably still trying to process how completely he'd miscalculated the woman he thought he knew. Ahead of me lay the unknown territory of a life lived entirely on my own terms. For the first time in 5 years of marriage, I was exactly where I belonged. The morning light filtering through the hotel suite's floor-to-ceiling windows felt different than any sunrise I'd experienced in years. For the first time since my wedding day, I'd slept alone by choice rather than circumstance, and the silence felt like freedom rather than loneliness. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Derek and 3 voicemails I hadn't bothered to listen to. There would be time for his panic later. I ordered room service and spread my laptop across the mahogany desk, diving into the familiar comfort of Velocity Sync's dashboard. The numbers told a story Derek couldn't have imagined even in his most ambitious fantasies. Monthly recurring revenue had grown by 43% in the last quarter alone, driven by 3 major enterprise contracts I'd closed while he thought I was struggling to find clients willing to pay my consulting rates. The coffee arrived as I was reviewing our pipeline of potential deals. The server, a young woman probably not much older than I'd been when I'd first moved to Austin, smiled warmly as she arranged the breakfast settings. Her name tag read Carmen, and something about her careful attention to detail reminded me of my younger self, determined to excel at every task no matter how small. "Beautiful morning," she said, gesturing toward the window where downtown Austin was coming to life beneath us. "Yes, it is," I agreed, and for the first time in months, I meant it completely. After she left, I pulled up the secure folder where I'd been documenting the slow deterioration of my marriage. Not out of paranoia, but out of the same methodical approach I brought to everything else in my life. Screenshots of Derek's deleted texts, financial records showing his increasing spending on things that didn't appear in our joint accounts, photos of receipts I'd found in his suit pockets for restaurants where we'd never eaten together. The pattern had become clear months ago, but I'd needed time to prepare. Building Velocity Sync had taught me that timing was everything in business, and I'd suspected the same principle would apply to the end of my marriage. Derek's announcement last night had simply confirmed what I'd already known and given me the opening I'd been waiting for. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Zara Patel, the only friend from my pre-Derek life who'd remained close despite the social pressures of my marriage into Austin's legal elite. Zara ran a successful marketing consultancy and had been one of the few people who'd never quite bought into my story about struggling with small consulting projects. "Please tell me you're not calling from jail," were her first words. Why would I be calling from jail? Because Derek Thompson showed up at my office at 8 this morning looking like he'd been hit by a truck, asking if I knew where you were and rambling about some company worth millions that you've apparently been hiding from him. I set down my coffee cup, processing this information. Derek had gone to Zara's office. That meant he was in full panic mode, reaching out to anyone who might have information about my whereabouts or my business activities. It also meant he was desperate enough to admit to outsiders that his wife had been keeping significant secrets from him. What did you tell him? That if you wanted him to know where you were, you'd tell him yourself. But Maya, what the hell is going on? He said you have a company worth $15 million. Is that true? The question hung in the air between us. Zara had been my study partner in graduate school, the person who'd helped me navigate the social complexities of University of Texas Business School, when I'd been the scholarship kid from New Mexico trying to fit in with trust fund babies and legacy admissions. She'd watched me struggle through my early years in Austin, had been a bridesmaid at my wedding, had tactfully ignored the way Derek's family treated me like an amusing curiosity rather than an equal. "It's true," I said quietly. A long pause. Jesus, Maya. How long? 3 years. Maybe longer depending on how you count the development time before we incorporated. And Derek had no idea? Derek had no interest. Every time I tried to talk to him about my work, he'd change the subject or give me that patronizing smile he uses when he thinks I'm being cute about things I don't really understand. Zara made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. That smug bastard. I always wanted to punch him when he'd introduce you as his wife who plays around with computers. Well, now he knows exactly how much I've been playing around. What are you going to do? It was a good question. I'd spent months preparing for the possibility that my marriage would end, but I'd always imagined it would be my choice to leave, rather than Derek's decision to discard me. His timing had been perfect in ways he couldn't have known, giving me the moral high ground while he dealt with the shock of learning that the wife he'd been planning to divorce was worth more than his entire family's law firm. "First, I'm going to protect the company," I said. "Derek's going to come after Velocity Sync with everything he's got, and I need to make sure our legal position is bulletproof." "What about personally? Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard again, just as it had when Jordan asked it the night before. Was I okay? My husband of 5 years had asked for a divorce on our anniversary, presumably to be with another woman. My entire life as I'd known it was disappearing. Everything I'd built in Austin was connected to Derek's world, from our social circle, to our shared home, to the careful balance I'd maintained between my public and private selves. But underneath, the shock and disruption, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. The exhaustion of maintaining 2 separate identities, of hiding my success and ambition to preserve Derek's comfort, of making myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for someone like me. All of that was finally over. "I think I'm better than okay," I said. "I think I'm free." After hanging up with Zara, I called Dr. Hassan Al-Mahmoud, the business mentor who'd guided me through Velocity Sync's early development. Hassan had built and sold 3 successful tech companies in Austin over the past 2 decades, and his advice had been invaluable as I'd navigated the complexities of scaling a software business while maintaining my cover as a small-time consultant. Maya? His warm voice carried its familiar note of calm authority. Jordan called me this morning. Congratulations on finally letting your husband in on your secret. I'm not sure congratulations are in order. This is going to get messy. Messy can be good, Hassan said. Messy means change, and change creates opportunities. Tell me what you're thinking. I walked to the window, looking down at the Austin streets where early morning joggers and dog walkers were beginning their daily routines. Normal people living normal lives, not hiding multi-million-dollar companies from their spouses or navigating the complex emotional terrain of marriages built on fundamental deceptions. Derek's going to fight for half of everything, I said. He's got connections, resources, and a law firm full of attorneys who specialize in asset division. More importantly, he's got his pride, and last night I hurt it badly. What do you have? Documentation. Financial records proving that Velocity Sync was built entirely with my own resources and labor. Email trails showing Derek's complete lack of interest in or support for my business activities. Evidence that he was planning to leave me anyway, which should help with the timing arguments. And emotionally, how are you handling this? Hassan had a gift for cutting through business strategy to the human elements that often determined success or failure. In the 3 years I'd known him, he'd been more of a mentor than Derek had ever been a partner, someone who saw my potential clearly and pushed me to achieve it. I'm scared, I admitted. Not of Derek or the legal fight, but of what comes next. I've been living a double life for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be completely myself. That's normal, Hassan said. You've been in survival mode, protecting something precious while it grew strong enough to stand on its own. Now Velocity Sync is established, profitable, and valuable enough to weather whatever storm Derek throws at it. The question is whether you're ready to step fully into the light. After our call, I spent the morning reviewing contracts and financial statements, preparing for the legal battle that was surely coming. Velocity Sync's books were immaculate, a testament to Jordan's meticulous attention to detail and my own paranoid record-keeping. Every expense, every revenue stream, every development milestone was documented with the kind of precision that would make auditors weep with joy. The company's structure was equally bulletproof. I'd incorporated as Maya Rodriguez rather than Maya Thompson, maintaining my maiden name for all business purposes. The intellectual property was owned by entities I'd established before my marriage, using inheritance money from my grandmother that predated any community property claims Derek might make. Most importantly, I had emails and financial records proving that Derek had not only failed to contribute to Velocity Sync's development, but had actively discouraged my entrepreneurial ambitions. Around noon, Jordan arrived at the hotel carrying a stack of legal documents and wearing the grim expression of someone delivering bad news. Derek's retained Mills, Harrison, and Associates, Jordan said without preamble. They're the most aggressive divorce firm in Austin, and they specialize in high-asset cases. I expected that. What else? They've already filed for temporary restraints on Velocity Sync's bank accounts and demanded full financial disclosure. They're arguing that you used marital assets to fund the company's development and that Derek is entitled to 50% of its value. I nodded, unsurprised. Derek might have been shocked by my revelation, but he'd recovered quickly enough to hire the best legal representation money could buy. Harrison Mills had a reputation for taking no prisoners in divorce proceedings, and he'd undoubtedly advised Derek to move fast and aggressively. What's our response? Jordan smiled for the first time since arriving. Complete disclosure, exactly as you anticipated. Every financial record, every email, every piece of documentation that shows Velocity Sync was built independently of Derek's knowledge, support, or resources, plus some additional materials you might find interesting. Jordan pulled out a tablet and opened a folder labeled Thompson Financial Analysis. The screen filled with charts, graphs, and financial statements that told a story I hadn't expected. I had our forensic accountant take a look at Derek's public financial filings, Jordan explained. Turns out your husband has been living well beyond his means for the past 2 years. Credit cards maxed out, a second mortgage on the house you didn't know about, and substantial loans from his father's firm that don't appear on any official records. The information hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been carefully managing our household finances and contributing what I believed to be my fair share, Derek had been accumulating debt I knew nothing about. The lifestyle we'd been living, the expensive restaurants and weekend trips, the country club membership and luxury car payments, all of it had been funded by credit and family loans rather than Derek's actual income. There's more, Jordan continued. The forensic accountant found evidence of significant spending on things that don't appear in your joint household expenses: hotel rooms, jewelry purchases, vacation rentals. The timeline matches up with when you suspected he was having an affair. I stared at the numbers, feeling a familiar mixture of betrayal and vindication. Derek hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been financing his infidelity with borrowed money while allowing me to believe we were building a stable financial future together. Meanwhile, I'd been secretly subsidizing our lifestyle with profits from Velocity Sync, money I'd earned through 18-hour workdays and sleepless nights of coding and client management. How bad is it? Bad enough that Derek probably can't afford a prolonged legal fight without significant help from his family, which gives us leverage. Jordan was right. Derek's financial position was much weaker than I'd realized, and his aggressive legal strategy was likely being funded by his father's firm, rather than his own resources. That created opportunities for negotiation that might allow me to protect Velocity Sync while giving Derek a way to save face with his family and colleagues. "What are you thinking?" Jordan asked. "I'm thinking Derek made a tactical error by moving so fast. He's revealed his strategy before understanding mine, and now we can respond accordingly." My phone rang, interrupting our strategy session. The caller ID showed my mother-in-law's name, and I hesitated before answering. Patricia Thompson had never quite warmed to me during the 5 years of my marriage to her son, maintaining the kind of polite disapproval that wealthy families reserved for daughters-in-law who didn't meet their standards of breeding and connections. "Maya, dear." Patricia's voice carried its familiar note of condescension wrapped in false warmth. "I think we need to talk." "Hello, Patricia. What can I do for you?" "Derek told us about your little revelation last night. Quite shocking." "Really? I had no idea you'd been keeping such significant secrets from the family." The family? As if I'd ever truly been considered part of it. Patricia had spent 5 years making it clear that I was a temporary addition to the Thompson legacy. Someone to be tolerated until Derek came to his senses and found a more suitable wife from their social circle. "I wasn't aware that my business activities required family approval," I said evenly. "Don't be difficult, dear. You know perfectly well that marriages require transparency, especially when it comes to financial matters. Derek is quite hurt that you felt you couldn't trust him with something so important." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Derek had been planning to divorce me while carrying on an affair, all while hiding his own financial troubles. But somehow I was the one who'd violated the sacred trust of marriage by building a successful company. "Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, Patricia?" "I think it would be best if we met in person. There are family matters to consider, and I'm sure we can work out an arrangement that's fair to everyone involved." Family matters? I could translate that easily enough. Patricia wanted to assess the threat Velocity Sync posed to her family's reputation and financial interests, then negotiate a settlement that would minimize both. She'd probably already consulted with the family's attorneys about the best way to handle a daughter-in-law who'd turned out to be worth more than her son. "I'll have my attorney contact Derek's," I said. "All communications should go through proper legal channels from now on." "Maya, there's no need to be adversarial about this. We're still family after all." "Actually, Patricia, according to your son, we're not family anymore. He made that quite clear last night." After hanging up, I felt Jordan watching me with concern. The call with Patricia had been a test, and we both knew it. The Thompson family was circling the wagons, trying to assess how much damage my revelation might cause to their carefully constructed social position. "They're scared," Jordan observed. "They should be. Derek's financial problems are going to become public record in the divorce proceedings, and that's going to raise uncomfortable questions about the family law firm's management and oversight. What about the acquisition offer from Dataflow Industries? If this legal fight drags on, it might affect their interest in purchasing Velocity Sync." I'd been thinking about the same thing. Dataflow's offer was generous, but it was contingent on clean ownership structures and minimal legal complications. A messy divorce proceeding could easily derail the acquisition, costing me not just the sale price, but potentially damaging Velocity Sync's reputation with other potential buyers. "Schedule a call with Dataflow for tomorrow morning," I decided. "I want to get ahead of this before Derek's legal team starts making noise about community property claims. And if they withdraw their offer, then we keep building the company. Independently, Velocity Sync is profitable and growing. We don't need an acquisition to succeed, but Derek doesn't know that." The afternoon brought a parade of phone calls from attorneys, accountants, and business advisors, each offering their perspective on the complex legal and financial challenges ahead. The consensus was clear. Derek had legitimate grounds to claim community property rights to assets acquired during our marriage, but my documentation was strong enough to mount a successful defense. The key would be proving that Velocity Sync had been built entirely through my own efforts and resources, without any contribution from marital assets or Derek's support. The emails I'd saved showing his dismissive attitude toward my work would be crucial, as would the financial records proving that I'd funded the company's development with inheritance money and early profits rather than our joint resources. As evening approached, I found myself standing at the hotel room window again, watching Austin's skyline light up against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Derek was probably meeting with his attorneys, strategizing about how to claim half of everything I'd built. His family was likely rallying around him, providing financial and emotional support while calculating the potential damage to their reputation. But for the first time in years, I felt completely aligned with my own interests and ambitions. No more hiding my success. No more pretending to be less than I was. No more making myself smaller to preserve someone else's comfort. The battle ahead would be difficult, but it would be fought on honest terms, with everything out in the open. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Maya, this is Chloe Brennan. We need to talk." The message sent a chill through me. Chloe, Derek's affair partner, reaching out directly. This was either a sign of desperation or the opening move in a new phase of the conflict. Either way, it meant the situation was about to become even more complicated. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Whatever Chloe wanted to discuss could wait. Tonight, I had more important things to focus on, like preparing for the fight of my life, and finally stepping fully into the person I'd been becoming in secret for the past 3 years. The woman Derek had asked for a divorce was gone, replaced by someone he'd never really known. And tomorrow, he was going to discover just how much he'd underestimated the wife he thought he could easily discard. The coffee shop on South Lamar buzzed with the usual morning energy of Austin's creative class, laptops open at every table, and conversations flowing between freelancers, startup founders, and remote workers. I'd chosen this location deliberately, neutral territory where neither Derek nor his legal team would think to look for me. The email from Dataflow Industries' CEO had arrived at 6 a.m., requesting an emergency video call to discuss recent developments affecting the acquisition timeline. I settled into a corner booth with my laptop and a double espresso, dreading the conversation ahead. Dataflow's interest in Velocity Sync represented more than just a financial opportunity. It was validation that the technology I'd developed in Secret was genuinely revolutionary, capable of transforming how major corporations manage their supply chains. But corporate acquisitions required clean ownership structures and minimal legal complications, two things my divorce proceedings threatened to complicate significantly. Marcus Chen, Dataflow's CEO, appeared on screen precisely at the scheduled time, his expression serious enough to confirm my worst fears. Behind him, I could see the gleaming conference room of Dataflow's Silicon Valley headquarters, a reminder of the corporate world I was trying to enter, despite the chaos Derek had introduced into my life. Maya, thank you for making time on short. Notice, Marcus began. I'll be direct. Our legal team has been monitoring public records, and we're aware that divorce proceedings have been initiated. We need to understand how this might affect Velocity Sync's ownership structure and our proposed acquisition. The question hung in the digital space between us, polite but loaded with implications. Dataflow had conducted extensive due diligence on Velocity Sync over the past 2 months, but that investigation had been based on the assumption that I held clear, uncontested ownership of the company and its intellectual property. Derek's legal claims threatened to complicate that picture significantly. The divorce won't affect Velocity Sync's core ownership structure or intellectual property rights, I said carefully. The company was established and developed using premarital assets and my independent labor. We have extensive documentation supporting this position. But there will be litigation? Potentially. My husband's legal team is exploring community property claims, but we believe those claims are without merit, and we're prepared to defend against them vigorously. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. In the corporate acquisition world, potentially, and prepared to defend vigorously were euphemisms for expensive legal battles that could drag on for months or years, exactly the kind of uncertainty that made investors nervous. Maya, let me be frank. Velocity Sync's technology is exactly what Dataflow needs to maintain our competitive edge in AI-powered logistics. Your algorithms are genuinely innovative, and the client results speak for themselves. But our board has concerns about acquiring assets that might be subject to contested ownership claims. I'd anticipated this conversation, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the stomach. 3 years of 18-hour days, breakthrough innovations, and carefully cultivated client relationships, all potentially threatened by Derek's desperate grab for assets he'd never contributed to or even acknowledged. What are you proposing? I asked. We'd like to keep the acquisition discussions active, but we need resolution of the ownership questions before we can proceed. Our legal team estimates that could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on how aggressively your husband pursues his claims. 2 years. The technology landscape could shift dramatically in that time. Competitors could emerge, and Velocity Sync's current market advantages could evaporate while I fought legal battles over assets that were rightfully mine from the beginning. Derek's timing had been more damaging than he could have possibly realized. I understand your position, I said finally. What if I could resolve the ownership questions more quickly? How? It was a good question. Standard divorce proceedings in Texas could indeed drag on for years, especially when one party had significant financial resources and legal connections. But there might be other approaches, strategies that played to Derek's weaknesses rather than his strengths. Give me 2 weeks, I said. If I can't provide clear resolution of the ownership issues by then, we can table the acquisition discussions until the legal situation stabilizes. Marcus agreed, though his expression suggested he didn't expect me to succeed. After ending the call, I sat in the coffee shop for a long moment, watching Austin's morning traffic flow past the windows. 2 weeks to resolve a situation that legal experts thought could take 2 years. It seemed impossible unless I could find leverage that Derek's aggressive legal strategy hadn't anticipated. My phone buzzed with another message from Chloe Brennan. Maya, please. I know you have no reason to trust me, but there are things about Derek that you need to know. Things that could help you. This time, I didn't delete the message. Instead, I stared at it while my mind raced through possibilities. Chloe was Derek's affair partner, the other woman who'd been secretly sharing my husband's affections while I'd been building Velocity Sync. She had every reason to want Derek's marriage to end, but reaching out to me directly suggested something more complicated than simple romantic rivalry. Against my better judgment, I typed back, 1 conversation, neutral location, 1 hour. Her response came immediately. Greenbelt Coffee on Barton Springs, 2 p.m. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls with attorneys, financial advisors, and business consultants. Each conversation reinforced the same message. Derek's legal position was stronger than I'd hoped, weaker than he probably realized, but sufficient to create exactly the kind of prolonged uncertainty that would derail the data flow acquisition. Jordan arrived at noon carrying a thick folder of financial documents and wearing an expression I'd learned to associate with particularly complex problems. Good news or bad news first? Jordan asked, settling into the booth across from me. Bad news. Let's get it over with. Derek's legal team has filed for an emergency injunction to freeze Velocity Sync's assets pending resolution of the community property claims. The hearing is scheduled for Friday morning. 3 days. If Derek succeeded in freezing the company's assets, it would effectively shut down operations while the legal proceedings dragged on. Clients would flee, employees would look for new jobs, and everything I'd built would slowly disintegrate while lawyers argued over who owned what. Good news? Jordan's expression brightened slightly. Our forensic accountant finished analyzing Derek's financial records. The picture is worse than we initially thought. He's not just living beyond his means. He's been actively concealing debt and using creative accounting to hide the extent of his financial problems. Jordan opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. Bank statements, credit reports, loan agreements, and investment records painted a picture of a man whose lifestyle had far exceeded his income for years. More importantly, they revealed a pattern of financial decisions that suggested Derek's divorce timing wasn't coincidental. Look at this, Jordan pointed to a series of transactions from 6 months earlier. Derek liquidated his retirement accounts and moved the money to offshore investment vehicles. Around the same time, he took out substantial loans against his partnership stake in his father's law firm. The implications were staggering. Derek hadn't just been planning to leave me. He'd been systematically moving assets beyond the reach of community property laws while accumulating debt that would become my legal responsibility as his spouse. The divorce wasn't just about Chloe or his dissatisfaction with our marriage. It was a financial escape strategy that would leave me holding the bag for his irresponsible spending while he started fresh with hidden assets and a new partner. There's more, Jordan continued. The offshore investments were high-risk ventures that have performed poorly. Derek has lost approximately 60% of the money he moved, but he's been hiding those losses from everyone, including his own family. How much are we talking about? Close to $400,000 in total losses, plus another $200,000 in accumulated debt that doesn't appear on any joint financial statements. I leaned back in the booth, processing the information. Derek's financial desperation explained his aggressive legal strategy and his family's sudden involvement in our divorce proceedings. They weren't just protecting Derek's interests. They were trying to prevent his financial collapse from damaging the family law firm's reputation and client relationships. This changes everything, I said finally. How so? Derek can't afford a prolonged legal fight, and his family can't afford the publicity that would come from detailed financial discovery proceedings. They need this resolved quickly and quietly, which gives us leverage we didn't have before. But first, I had to meet with Chloe Brennan and discover what she knew about Derek's activities that even our forensic accountant hadn't uncovered. Greenbelt Coffee occupied a converted house near Zilker Park, popular with Austin's environmental crowd, and young professionals who appreciated its commitment to sustainable practices and locally sourced ingredients. I arrived early and claimed a table on the covered patio, positioning myself where I could observe the other customers while maintaining some privacy for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Chloe arrived exactly on time, and I recognized her immediately from the social media photos I'd found during my investigation into Derek's affair. She was younger than me by several years, with the kind of effortless blonde beauty that came from good genetics and expensive maintenance. Her designer handbag and jewelry suggested she was doing well financially, though I wondered whether that success was independent of her relationship with my husband. "Maya," she said, extending her hand as she approached the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this must be awkward." Awkward didn't begin to cover it. I was sitting across from the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband while I'd been building a multi-million-dollar company to secure our financial future. But Chloe's demeanor surprised me. Instead of the defensive hostility I'd expected, she seemed nervous, almost apologetic. "What did you want to discuss?" I asked without accepting her handshake. Chloe settled into the chair across from me and pulled out her own phone, setting it on the table between us. "Derek doesn't know I'm here. In fact, he'd probably try to stop me if he knew what I was about to tell you." "I'm listening." "Derek has been lying to both of us," Chloe said without preamble, "about his finances, about his intentions, about everything." She unlocked her phone and opened a folder of screenshots, turning the device so I could see the screen. Text messages between her and Derek, dating back over a year, revealed a relationship that was more complex than a simple affair. "Derek told me he was separated from you," Chloe continued. "He said you'd grown apart and were living, essentially, separate lives while working out the legal details of an amicable divorce. He said you were focused on your consulting work and weren't interested in reconciliation." The messages supported her story. Derek had constructed an elaborate fiction about our marriage, portraying me as a distant, career-obsessed wife who'd already mentally checked out of the relationship. More troubling were his promises about their future together once the divorce was finalized. "He told you he was wealthy," I observed, reading over several messages where Derek had promised expensive vacations and talked about purchasing a house together. "More than wealthy. He said he was set to inherit significant assets from his family's law practice, and that the divorce settlement would be minimal because you didn't have substantial independent assets." The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. While Derek had been promising Chloe a lifestyle funded by wealth he didn't actually possess, I'd been secretly accumulating the very assets he'd assumed didn't exist. We'd both been living with completely false information about our shared financial reality. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Chloe's composure cracked slightly, and I caught a glimpse of genuine distress beneath her polished exterior. "Because I found out yesterday that Derek has been borrowing money using me as collateral." She pulled up another set of documents. On her phone, financial records that told a story even more disturbing than what Jordan had uncovered. Derek had been using his relationship with Chloe to secure additional loans, claiming that her income and assets would be available to support his debt obligations once they were married. "He forged your signature on loan applications?" I asked, scanning the documents. "Worse. He convinced me to co-sign for several loans, telling me it was temporary and that he needed to restructure some investments before the divorce was finalized. I trusted him completely." The picture was becoming clearer. Derek's financial situation was even more precarious than we'd realized, and he'd been manipulating both his wife and his girlfriend to fund his increasingly desperate attempts to maintain his lifestyle. Chloe wasn't just the other woman. She was another victim of Derek's systematic deception. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, "including the loans I co-signed and some investment funds he managed on my behalf." "Approximately $300,000. Added to the losses Jordan had uncovered, Derek's total financial exposure was approaching $1 million. No wonder he'd been so aggressive about pursuing community property claims against Velocity Sync. He wasn't just trying to punish me for my success. He was desperately trying to cover debts that threatened to destroy both his personal finances and his family's business reputation. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Help," Chloe said simply. "Derek has been playing us against each other, but we're both victims of his lies. If we work together, maybe we can both get out of this situation without losing everything." The proposal was audacious. Team up with my husband's mistress to expose his financial fraud and protect both of our interests. It went against every instinct I had about loyalty, dignity, and appropriate responses to betrayal. But it also offered something Derek's aggressive legal strategy couldn't counter: inside information about his true financial position and evidence of misconduct that could shift the entire balance of power in the divorce proceedings. "What kind of help are you thinking about?" I asked carefully. Chloe leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the relative privacy of our location. "I have access to financial records Derek doesn't know I copied. Bank statements, investment account summaries, correspondence with the offshore companies where he moved your marital assets. More importantly, I have recordings of conversations where he admitted to hiding assets and planning to minimize your settlement." Recordings. In Texas, recording conversations without consent was illegal, but if Chloe had evidence of Derek committing financial fraud, those recordings might be admissible under certain circumstances. At minimum, they would provide valuable intelligence about Derek's strategy and true financial position. "Why would you betray him like this?" "Because he betrayed me first," Chloe said, her voice hardening. "I fell in love with someone who turned out to be a pathological liar. He's stolen money from me, damaged my credit rating, and put me at legal risk for his fraudulent activities. The Derek I thought I knew doesn't exist." I studied Chloe's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. She was asking me to trust someone who'd been sleeping with my husband for over a year, someone who'd believed Derek's lies about our marriage and participated in his deception. But her distress seemed genuine, and the financial documents she'd shared painted a picture of victimization that mirrored my own experience in different ways. "If I agree to work with you, what would that look like practically?" "We share information about Derek's real financial situation and coordinate our legal strategies to maximize both of our recoveries. You get the evidence you need to protect your company, and I get help recovering the money Derek stole from me." It was a devil's bargain, but one that offered advantages neither of us could achieve independently. Chloe had access to information about Derek's recent activities that would be impossible for me to obtain through normal legal discovery. I had resources and legal representation that could help both of us navigate the complex financial fraud issues Derek had created. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "I understand. But Maya, there's something else you should know. Derek isn't just planning to take half of your company. He's planning to destroy it." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" Chloe pulled up another set of messages on her phone, conversations between Derek and someone whose contact information was listed only as corporate counsel. The messages were cryptic but alarming, discussing strategies to neutralize competitive threats and protect client relationships from disruption. "Derek's been researching Velocity Sync's client base and technology," Chloe explained. "He's planning to use information from the divorce proceedings to approach your competitors with intelligence about your business operations." The implications were staggering. Derek wasn't just trying to claim ownership of Velocity Sync. He was planning industrial espionage that could destroy the company's competitive advantages and client relationships. Even if I successfully defended against his community property claims, the damage to Velocity Sync's business could be irreparable. "When is this supposed to happen?" "Soon. The messages suggest he's already made contact with at least one of your competitors." I felt my carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. Derek's betrayal was more systematic and malicious than I'd imagined. He wasn't just leaving me for another woman or trying to claim assets he felt entitled to. He was actively working to destroy the business I'd built, presumably out of spite for the success I'd hidden from him. "Chloe," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "I think we need to discuss the details of our potential collaboration." Her relief was visible. "Does that mean you'll work with me?" "It means Derek has made a serious, tactical error. He's assumed we'd remain enemies while he played us against each other. Instead, he's given us every reason to combine forces against him." I pulled out my own phone and opened my contact list. "I'm going to call my attorney and ask him to set up a meeting with both of us tomorrow morning. If you're serious about this alliance, we need to move quickly." "I'm serious," Chloe said. "Maya, I know I'm not the person you expected to be helping you, but Derek has underestimated both of us. Maybe it's time to show him what that mistake is going to cost him." As I made the call to schedule the emergency legal meeting, I realized that Derek's carefully orchestrated plan to discard his inconvenient wife and claim her hidden assets had just encountered a complication he couldn't have anticipated. The two women he'd been manipulating were about to stop fighting each other and start fighting him. The battle for Velocity Sync was about to become something much larger, a war against systematic deception, financial fraud, and the kind of casual cruelty that treated other people as disposable assets to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Derek had started this fight, but he was about to discover that he'd seriously miscalculated the opposition he was facing. The law offices of Sterling, Martinez, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Austin tower, their conference room windows offering panoramic views of Lady Bird Lake and the Texas state capitol. I'd chosen this firm specifically because they had no connections to Derek's legal network and a reputation for handling complex financial fraud cases with discretion and aggression. Rebecca Sterling, the firm's managing partner, reviewed the documents Chloe and I had compiled over the past 48 hours. Spread across the polished mahogany table were bank statements, investment records, loan applications, and transcripts of recorded conversations that painted a devastating picture of Derek's systematic deception. Chloe sat beside me, her earlier nervousness replaced by grim determination as we prepared to execute our coordinated response to Derek's legal assault. "This is remarkable work," Rebecca said, looking up from a particularly damning email exchange between Derek and his offshore investment manager. "In 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen such comprehensive documentation of financial fraud. Your husband has essentially created a paper trail of every fraudulent transaction, every deceptive communication, every attempt to hide assets from Community Property Division." "What's our strongest argument?" I asked. "Several angles, actually. The recordings Chloe obtained demonstrate clear intent to defraud both of you. Derek's statements about hiding assets from the divorce settlement could void any community property claims he might have. More importantly, his plan to sabotage Velocity Sync through industrial espionage opens him up to criminal charges and civil liability that could bankrupt him completely." Rebecca turned to Chloe, who had been quiet during most of the meeting. "Ms. Brennan, I need to be clear about your legal exposure. You've been victimized by Derek's fraud, but you've also been involved in some questionable financial transactions. We'll need to navigate carefully to protect your interests while ensuring your testimony remains credible." "I understand," Chloe said. "I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from my poor judgment, but I want Derek held accountable for what he's done to both of us." The irony of sitting in a conference room with my husband's mistress, planning our joint legal strategy against him, wasn't lost on me. 2 days ago, I'd considered Chloe my enemy, the other woman who'd stolen my husband's affections. Now she was my ally in exposing Derek's true character and protecting both of our financial futures. "What's our timeline?" I asked. "Derek's emergency hearing to freeze Velocity Sync's assets is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Rebecca replied. "We'll file our own emergency motion tonight, requesting an immediate investigation into Derek's financial misconduct and asking the court to impose sanctions for his fraudulent behavior. With this evidence, we should be able to not only defeat his asset freeze but also put him on the defensive." What about the industrial espionage angle? Rebecca's expression grew serious. That's where things get complicated. Derek's communications with your competitors suggest he's already shared confidential information about Velocity Sync's operations. We'll need to move quickly to protect your intellectual property and client relationships. She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching out our strategy. First, we'll file for an immediate restraining order, preventing Derek from any further contact with Velocity Sync's competitors or clients. Second, we'll demand emergency discovery of all communications between Derek and third parties regarding your business. Third, we'll notify your major clients about the potential security breach and assure them that you're taking protective measures. The plan was aggressive, but necessary. Derek's betrayal had evolved from personal to professional, threatening not just my marriage, but everything I'd built over the past 3 years. The fact that he'd enlisted his mistress as an unwitting accomplice in his financial schemes while simultaneously planning to destroy my business demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty I hadn't imagined him capable of. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out my phone. "I need to call the CEO of Dataflow Industries and update him on the situation. They've been considering acquiring Velocity Sync, but they put the deal on hold because of the divorce proceedings." Rebecca nodded. "That's smart. Corporate acquirers hate uncertainty, but they hate fraud even more. If we can demonstrate that Derek's claims are not only baseless but criminally fraudulent, it might actually strengthen your position with Dataflow." As we wrapped up the meeting, Chloe touched my arm gently. "Maya, I know this situation is incredibly awkward for both of us, but I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. Derek convinced me that your marriage was already over." I looked at her carefully, still processing the complex emotions of working with someone who'd been intimate with my husband for over a year. "Chloe, we're both victims of Derek's manipulation. The important thing now is making sure he doesn't victimize anyone else." "What happens after this is over?" she asked. "Between us, I mean." It was a fair question. Once Derek's fraud was exposed and our legal issues resolved, Chloe and I would have no reason to maintain contact. We'd shared a common enemy, but that didn't make us friends. Still, I felt an unexpected sympathy for her situation. She'd been manipulated just as systematically as I had, just in different ways. "I think we both deserve to move on with our lives," I said finally, without Derek's lies complicating everything. That evening, I returned to my hotel suite to find 17 missed calls from Derek and a series of increasingly desperate text messages. His tone had shifted from angry to panicked as he apparently began to realize that his carefully orchestrated legal strategy was falling apart. "Maya, we need to talk before tomorrow's hearing," read one message. "There are things you don't understand about our financial situation," another. "Please call me. I know you're angry, but we can work this out without involving lawyers." The most recent. "I know you've been talking to Chloe. Whatever she told you, it's not the whole story." I poured myself a glass of wine and settled onto the suite's balcony, looking out over downtown Austin as the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow would bring the first direct legal confrontation between Derek and me, the moment when our marriage would officially transform from a private relationship into a public legal battle. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see Jordan's name on the caller ID. My business partner rarely called after hours unless there was an emergency. "Maya, we have a problem," Jordan said without preamble. "I just got a call from our biggest client, Meridian Logistics. They're asking questions about Velocity Sync's ownership structure and whether there are any legal issues that might affect our service delivery." My stomach dropped. Derek was moving faster than we'd anticipated, already implementing his plan to sabotage Velocity Sync's client relationships while we were still preparing our legal response. "What did you tell them?" "That we're in the middle of routine legal proceedings related to your divorce, but that Velocity Sync's operations and ownership are completely unaffected. But Maya, They seem to have very specific information about our intellectual property and development processes. Someone has been feeding them details that should be confidential. Derek, I said grimly. He's been researching the company and sharing information with our competitors. Can we stop him? We're filing emergency motions tomorrow morning. But Jordan, we need to get ahead of this. Can you schedule calls with our other major clients? I want to personally assure them that Velocity Sync's operations are stable and that we're taking legal action to protect our intellectual property. Already on it. But Maya, there's something else. Data Flow Industries called this afternoon. They want to move forward with the acquisition discussions, but only if we can resolve the legal issues within the next week. A week. What had seemed like an impossible timeline that morning now felt even more compressed. Derek's industrial espionage campaign was accelerating, threatening to destroy Velocity Sync's value even if I successfully defended against his community property claims. Set up the call with Dataflow for tomorrow afternoon, I decided. After the court hearing, I'll know more about our legal position and timeline for resolution. After hanging up with Jordan, I called Dr. Hassan Al-Mahmoud, my business mentor. His calm voice provided a welcome counterpoint to the chaos swirling around. Maya, I've been following the situation through Jordan. How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm angry. Derek isn't just trying to take half of what I've built. He's trying to destroy it completely. Anger can be useful if you channel it constructively, Hassan observed. What's your plan? I outlined the legal strategy Rebecca had developed, the alliance with Chloe, and the evidence we'd compiled of Derek's fraudulent activities. Hassan listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific details. You've built a strong case, he said finally. But, Maya, you need to be prepared for Derek to escalate further. Desperate people do desperate things, and it sounds like Derek's financial situation is truly precarious. What do you mean? Think about it from his perspective. He's facing exposure of systematic fraud, potential criminal charges, and financial ruin. His family's law firm could be damaged by association. His relationship with Chloe is probably over. He's lost everything he thought he could count on. Hassan's words sent a chill through me. I'd been so focused on the legal and business aspects of the conflict that I hadn't fully considered Derek's psychological state. A man who'd constructed such elaborate deceptions and manipulated multiple people simultaneously might be capable of even more desperate measures. What are you suggesting? Be careful, Maya. Make sure your security is adequate, both personally and for Velocity Sync. Document everything, vary your routines, and don't underestimate what Derek might do if he feels cornered. After ending the call, I double-checked the locks on my hotel suite and reviewed the security protocols Jordan and I had established for Velocity Sync's offices and data systems. Hassan's warning felt prudent rather than paranoid. Derek had already demonstrated his willingness to engage in industrial espionage and financial fraud. There was no reason to assume he wouldn't escalate further if his legal position continued to deteriorate. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, Austin's typical weather reflecting the somber mood as I prepared for the emergency court hearing. Rebecca had assembled a team of 3 attorneys and a paralegal, their briefcases filled with the evidence Chloe and I had compiled. Across the courthouse corridor, Derek sat with his own legal team, Harrison Mills and 2 associates from his firm's litigation department. Derek looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of strain. His suit was wrinkled, his hair less carefully styled than usual, and there were dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept well. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something I'd never seen before in 5 years of marriage. Fear. Judge. Patricia Hendricks called the hearing to order, her no-nonsense demeanor immediately establishing that she had little patience for procedural games or emotional theatrics. She reviewed the competing motions, Derek's request to freeze Velocity Sync's assets, and our counter-motion alleging fraud and requesting sanctions. Harrison Mills rose first, presenting Derek's position with practiced eloquence. Your Honor, this is a straightforward community property case. During the course of their marriage, Mrs. Thompson developed and operated a business that is now valued at $15 million. Mr. Thompson has legitimate claims to half of that value, and we're asking the court to preserve those assets, while ownership issues are resolved. And the evidence of fraud alleged in the counter-motion? Judge Hendricks asked. Unsubstantiated accusations designed to distract from the core issue of asset division, Mills replied smoothly. Mrs. Thompson's team has presented a collection of taken-out-of-context communications and financial records that don't support their inflammatory claims. Rebecca stood to present our case, her voice calm but commanding. Your Honor, we have extensive evidence that Mr. Thompson has engaged in systematic financial fraud, including hiding assets in offshore accounts, forging loan documents, and manipulating third parties to support his fraudulent activities. More concerning, we have evidence that Mr. Thompson is actively engaged in industrial espionage, sharing confidential business information with his wife's competitors in an attempt to sabotage her company. She approached the bench with a thick folder of documents. We have recorded conversations where Mr. Thompson admits to hiding assets from the divorce proceedings. We have bank records showing unauthorized transfers to offshore accounts. We have email communications proving that Mr. Thompson has shared proprietary information about Velocity Sync with competing companies. Judge Hendricks reviewed the documents. For several minutes, her expression growing increasingly stern. Mr. Mills, these recordings and financial records appear to be authentic. How do you respond to the allegations of asset concealment and industrial espionage? Mills looked uncomfortable for the first time during the hearing. Your Honor, without proper context and opportunity to examine the evidence thoroughly, we can't respond substantively to these allegations. We'd request time to review the materials and prepare a proper response. Time is exactly what we don't have, Rebecca interjected. Mr. Thompson's industrial espionage campaign is ongoing and causing immediate damage to Velocity Sync's business. Relationships. Every day this continues, Mrs. Rodriguez's company loses value and competitive advantage. Mrs. Rodriguez? Judge Hendricks asked, looking confused. Your Honor, Velocity Sync was incorporated under Mrs. Rodriguez's maiden name, using premarital assets. She maintained her professional identity separately from her marriage, and the company's development had no connection to marital resources or Mr. Thompson's support. The distinction was crucial for establishing that Velocity Sync existed independently of my marriage to Derek, strengthening my claims to sole ownership. Judge Hendricks made notes on her legal pad, clearly recognizing the significance of the corporate structure. Mr. Mills, what's your client's response to the allegations of industrial espionage? Mills whispered urgently with Derek before responding. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson has had legitimate business discussions with various parties, but we deny any improper sharing of confidential information. Legitimate business discussions, Rebecca repeated incredulously. Your Honor, we have email evidence of Mr. Thompson sharing proprietary algorithms, client lists, and strategic plans with Velocity Sync's direct competitors. This isn't legitimate business discussion. It's industrial espionage designed to destroy my client's company out of spite. Judge Hendricks set down the documents and looked directly at Derek. Mr. Thompson, these are very serious allegations. Industrial espionage can result in both criminal charges and substantial civil liability. Do you understand the gravity of the situation? Derek stood, his voice shaky for the first time I could remember. Your Honor, I've been trying to protect my legitimate interests in marital property. My wife hid a $15 million company from me for 3 years. I think I deserve some consideration for that betrayal. Mr. Thompson, Judge Hendricks said sharply, your feelings about your wife's business activities don't justify potentially criminal behavior. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting Mrs. Rodriguez's motion for an immediate restraining order, preventing any further contact between you and Velocity Sync's competitors or clients. I'm also ordering emergency discovery of all communications between you and third parties regarding Velocity Sync's business operations. She turned to Derek's legal team. Mr. Mills, your client's motion to freeze Velocity Sync's assets is denied. Furthermore, I'm scheduling a full hearing on the fraud allegations for next Monday. If the evidence supports these claims, your client could face criminal referral and significant sanctions. The gavel's bang echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Derek's face went pale as the implications sank in. His aggressive legal strategy had not only failed, but had exposed him to potential criminal liability and financial ruin. Across the aisle, I saw him whisper urgently to Harrison Mills, who shook his head grimly. As we gathered our documents and prepared to leave, Derek approached me directly for the first time since our anniversary dinner. "Maya," he said quietly, "we need to talk, privately." "All communications go through our attorneys now," I replied, not looking at him directly. "You don't understand what you're doing. This isn't just about us anymore. My family's firm, my father's reputation, everything could be destroyed." I finally looked at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man I'd been married to for 5 years. Not the charming lawyer who'd swept me off my feet in graduate school, not the ambitious partner who'd seemed destined for success, but a desperate man who'd built his entire life on deception and manipulation. "Derek," I said quietly, "you should have thought about those consequences before you decided to destroy my business and steal money from the woman you claim to love." As I walked away from him, I heard him call my name one more time, but I didn't turn around. The battle was far from over, but the first major engagement had gone decisively in my favor. Derek's carefully orchestrated plan to claim half of Velocity Sync while destroying my reputation and business relationships had backfired spectacularly. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca gathered our legal team for a quick debrief. "That went better than I expected," she said. "Judge Hendricks clearly understands the gravity of Derek's misconduct, and the restraining order will stop the industrial espionage immediately." "What happens next?" I asked. "Derek's team will try to minimize the damage, probably by offering a settlement that avoids criminal prosecution. But Maya, you're in a very strong position now. Derek's community property claims are essentially worthless given the fraud evidence, and he's facing potential criminal charges that could send him to prison." As we stood on the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed with a call from Marcus Chen at Dataflow Industries. The timing was perfect. I finally had good news to share about the legal situation. "Maya," Marcus said when I answered, "I've been following the public records from your court hearing this morning. It sounds like the ownership issues are resolving in your favor." "That's right. Derek's claims have been effectively dismissed, and we're moving forward with sanctions against him for fraudulent behavior." "Excellent. Our board met this morning, and we're prepared to move forward with the acquisition immediately. Can you be in Silicon Valley tomorrow for final negotiations?" "Tomorrow." Less than a week after Derek had demanded a divorce, less than 5 days after I'd discovered the full extent of his betrayal, I was being offered the opportunity to sell Velocity Sync for enough money to secure my financial independence permanently. "I'll be there," I said. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Derek's attempt to destroy my business had actually accelerated the very outcome he'd been trying to prevent. By exposing his fraud and eliminating the legal uncertainty around Velocity Sync's ownership, we'd cleared the path for an acquisition that would make me wealthier than Derek could have imagined when he'd first asked for a divorce. The war wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned decisively. Derek had started this fight assuming he held all the advantages: legal connections, financial resources, social status, and the support of his family's established reputation. Instead, he'd discovered that the quiet, supportive wife he'd taken for granted was better prepared for battle than he could have possibly anticipated. Tomorrow, I would fly to California to negotiate the sale of the company I'd built in secret. Next week, I would return to Austin to watch Derek face the consequences of his systematic deception and fraud. And someday soon, I would finally be free to live my life completely on my own terms, without hiding my success or apologizing for my ambition. The Dataflow Industries headquarters in Palo Alto hummed with the quiet efficiency of a company that had perfected the art of corporate acquisition. I sat in their executive boardroom, watching Marcus Chen and his team review the final purchase agreement for Velocity Sync. The number at the bottom of the contract was larger than I'd dared to imagine when I'd first started coding in my spare bedroom 3 years ago. $18 million, cash, with performance bonuses that could push the total to $25 million over the next 2 years. "Maya, this is exceptional work," said Dataflow's chief technology officer, scrolling through Velocity Sync's algorithm documentation on her tablet. "Your AI predictive models are at least 2 years ahead of anything else in the market. We're not just buying a company. We're buying a significant competitive advantage." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Derek had been dismissing my work as a hobby and planning to destroy my business, I'd been building technology that industry leaders considered revolutionary. His attempt to sabotage Velocity Sync had only accelerated its sale to the highest bidder, securing my financial future in ways he could never have anticipated. "When can we announce publicly?" Marcus asked. "Give me until next week," I replied. "I have some personal matters to resolve in Austin first." Marcus nodded understandingly. Corporate executives were accustomed to the complex legal and personal considerations that accompanied major business transactions. He didn't need to know that my personal matters involved watching my ex-husband face criminal charges for fraud and industrial espionage. The flight back to Austin gave me time to process the magnitude of what had happened in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been the hidden entrepreneur married to a man who was planning to discard me. Now I was a multimillionaire tech executive whose company had just been acquired by one of Silicon Valley's most respected firms. Derek's betrayal had inadvertently catalyzed the exact outcome he'd been trying to prevent. Jordan met me at the airport, practically bouncing with excitement, despite the professional composure they usually maintained. "Maya, the press release is ready to go whenever you give the word. The tech blogs are going to go crazy when they realize you've been operating under the radar for 3 years. What about our clients?" "Thrilled. Meridian Logistics, actually, increased their contract when they learned about the Dataflow acquisition. Apparently, being acquired by a major corporation made them more confident in our long-term stability, not less." We drove through Austin's familiar streets toward downtown, where the final legal proceedings would determine Derek's fate. The city looked different somehow, as if I were seeing it with new eyes after spending 24 hours in Silicon Valley's rarefied corporate atmosphere. Austin had been my home for 7 years, but it had always felt like Derek's territory, shaped by his connections and social networks. Now I could finally see it as a place where I might choose to stay or leave based on my own preferences, rather than his career requirements. Rebecca Sterling's office buzzed with activity as her legal team prepared for Derek's final hearing. The evidence of his fraud had been overwhelming, but criminal proceedings required a different level of proof and preparation than civil litigation. "How is he handling everything?" I asked. "Not well," Rebecca replied grimly. "Harrison Mills withdrew from representation yesterday, citing ethical conflicts. Derek's father has distanced himself publicly to protect the family firm. Derek's facing this essentially alone, which makes him unpredictable." "What kind of sentence is he looking at?" "If convicted on all charges, 5 to 10 years federal prison time, plus substantial financial penalties. The industrial espionage charges carry particularly severe consequences because they involve interstate commerce and computer fraud." The magnitude of Derek's fall was staggering. A week ago, he'd been a successful attorney with a partnership track at a prestigious firm, married to someone he considered a struggling consultant, confident in his ability to control the narrative of our divorce. Now he was facing prison time, financial ruin, and the complete destruction of his professional reputation. "Maya," Rebecca said carefully, "Derek's new attorney reached out this morning. They want to discuss a plea agreement." "What kind of plea agreement?" "Full admission of guilt on the fraud charges, complete cooperation with authorities, and agreement to pay restitution to both you and Chloe. In exchange, the prosecution would recommend minimum sentencing, and Derek would avoid trial." I considered. The offer. A plea agreement would resolve everything quickly and privately, allowing me to move forward without the circus of a public trial. But it would also allow Derek to escape the full consequences of his systematic deception and manipulation. "What does Chloe think?" "She's inclined to accept. The restitution would recover most of the money Derek stole from her, and she wants to put this behind her as quickly as possible." I understood Chloe's position. She'd been Derek's victim almost as much as I had, manipulated into financial arrangements that had nearly ruined her. But I felt less charitable toward the man who'd spent months planning to destroy everything I'd built while pretending to love me. "I need to think about it," I said finally. That evening, I walked along Lady Bird Lake, watching Austin's skyline, reflect in the water as joggers and cyclists enjoyed the warm Texas evening. My phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues who'd learned about the data flow acquisition through industry networks. Zara had sent a bottle of champagne to my hotel with a note. "About time the world found out how brilliant you are." Dr. Hassan had texted, "Proud of you for staying true to your vision despite everything. The best revenge is success." Even Jordan had uncharacteristically added personal comments to our business communications. "Watching you handle this situation has been inspiring. You've shown incredible strength and strategic thinking under pressure." Their support meant more than they could know. For years, I'd hidden my success and ambition to preserve Derek's comfort and avoid threatening his ego. Now finally, I could accept congratulations openly and own my achievements without apology or qualification. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see Derek's name on the caller ID. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Maya." His voice was different, stripped of the confident charm that had defined him for as long as I'd known him. "I know I'm not supposed to contact you directly, but I need you to hear this from me. Derek, you should talk to your attorney. My attorney quit. My father won't take my calls. The firm has suspended me pending the outcome of the criminal case. Maya, I've lost everything." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Genuine remorse. Not the calculated apology of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the broken recognition of someone who'd finally understood the consequences of their actions. "You did this to yourself," I said quietly. I know I did. Maya, I need you to understand that I never meant for things to go this far. When I found out about Velocity Sync, I felt like my entire marriage had been a lie. I acted out of hurt and pride, and I made terrible decisions. You tried to destroy my business, Derek. You stole money from Chloe. You committed fraud. This wasn't just hurt feelings. You're right, and I'm going to face the consequences. But Maya, I need to ask you something, and I'll understand if you say no. I waited, curious despite myself about what Derek could possibly want from me at this point. The plea agreement includes an opportunity for me to make a public statement, acknowledging what I did and apologizing to the people I hurt. I want to include you in that, if you'll let me. Not because it will help my case, but because you deserve to have the truth told publicly. The offer surprised me. A public acknowledgement of Derek's fraud would clear my reputation completely and establish the record about Velocity Sync's independent development. It would also require Derek to humiliate himself publicly, admitting to criminal behavior in front of the same social circles where he'd once been respected. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do. Maybe the first completely honest thing I've done in years. I walked along the lake trail, processing Derek's offer and what it might mean for both of us. A public confession would give me complete vindication and allow me to move forward without any lingering questions about Velocity Sync's legitimacy or my own integrity. It would also end Derek's legal troubles more quickly, allowing both of us to begin rebuilding our lives. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "Maya, there's one more thing. I want you to know that your success with Velocity Sync, it's incredible. I was wrong to dismiss your work, wrong to underestimate what you were capable of. You built something amazing, and you did it despite having a husband who didn't support or believe in you." After hanging up, I continued walking until I reached the pedestrian bridge that connected downtown Austin to the south side of the lake. From the center of the bridge, I could see the entire city spread out before me, the same view I'd admired on countless evenings during my marriage to Derek. But tonight, it looked different. Not like Derek's city where I was an outsider trying to fit in, but like a place where I could choose to stay or leave based on my own preferences and opportunities. 2 days later, I stood in the federal courthouse as Derek read his prepared statement to a packed courtroom. Media representatives, legal colleagues, and business associates had gathered to witness the spectacular fall of a man who'd once seemed destined for success in Austin's legal establishment. I systematically defrauded my wife and my girlfriend, hiding assets and manipulating financial records to support a lifestyle I couldn't afford, Derek said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his admissions. I engaged in industrial espionage, sharing confidential business information with competitors in an attempt to sabotage my wife's company. I did these things out of pride, jealousy, and a complete failure of character. He looked directly at me for the first time. Maya Rodriguez built Velocity Sync entirely through her own intelligence, hard work, and resources. I contributed nothing to her success and actively worked to undermine it. She deserves recognition for her achievements, and I deserve the consequences of my criminal behavior. The judge accepted Derek's plea and sentenced him to 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and restitution payments totaling nearly $500,000. As court officers led him away, Derek caught my eye one last time and mouthed, "Thank you." I felt an unexpected moment of sadness watching him disappear through the courthouse doors. Despite everything he'd done, Derek had been my husband for 5 years, and there had been genuine love between us once. But the man I'd fallen in love with had been largely fictional, a carefully constructed persona that concealed the insecurity and desperation that had ultimately destroyed him. Outside the courthouse, reporters approached me for comments, but I politely declined interviews. The public record spoke for itself, and I had no interest in prolonging the media attention. I was ready to move forward with my life. 3 months later, I stood in Velocity Sync's new headquarters in Austin's Innovation District, watching our engineering team integrate our AI algorithms into Dataflow's global logistics platform. The acquisition had exceeded even Marcus Chen's optimistic projections, with several Fortune 100 companies requesting pilot programs based on our technology. Chloe had used her restitution money to start her own consulting firm, specializing in financial fraud prevention. We'd maintained cordial, but distant contact, both of us recognizing that our alliance had been circumstantial rather than personal. She was building her own new life, just as I was building mine. Jordan had accepted a promotion to Chief Technology Officer of Dataflow's Austin division, leading the integration of Velocity Sync's team into the larger organization. Dr. Hassan had joined our advisory board, providing strategic guidance as we scaled our operations nationally. The best part of my new life was its complete authenticity. No more hiding my success. No more pretending to be less than I was. No more accommodating someone else's insecurities at the expense of my own ambitions. I could finally be completely myself, professionally and personally. My phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "Dinner tonight? I found a new restaurant I think you'll love." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I have something to celebrate." What I had to celebrate wasn't just financial success or professional recognition, though both were deeply satisfying. What I was celebrating was freedom. Freedom from deception, from the exhausting work of maintaining a double life, from the constant compromise of living with someone who saw me as less than I was, rather than more than I might become. Derek had thought he was discarding an inconvenient wife who would be grateful for whatever settlement he chose to offer. Instead, he'd liberated someone who'd been hiding her light under a bushel for far too long. His betrayal had hurt, but it had also revealed my own strength and resilience in ways I might never have discovered otherwise. As I locked up the office and headed out into the Austin evening, I felt genuinely excited about my future for the first time in years. Not because someone else had validated my worth, but because I'd finally validated it myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.